Hello and welcome to a very special cover story interview with Dr. Sanjay Baru. He's out with his latest book. This is the fifth book that he's written. He's also edited two others. 75 years of Indian economy, re-emerge, reinvest and re-engage. So congratulations, Dr. Baru, on this book. And this is a book, as he writes in his forward, is for the young millennials to understand India's economic journey, from pre-independence really starts to the now, to where we were a feudal agrarian economy. We, along with China, also at a point in the 1700s contributed to about 50% of the world's GDP, to now where we are. I think China's gone way ahead of us, but we are nowhere near the 50% mark. And also how India has transformed itself to a modern industrial service based economy. So thank you, Dr. Baru, for this book, which is also helping not just millennials, but people like me who don't have a strong, sound economic base. So it, breaks down things and makes it simple for us. Thank you for the book.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you for reading it, and thank you for engaging me in a conversation on it. In fact, you are the first person I know who's actually read the book and is interested in talking about it. So, thank you.
Always, we look forward to all your books. But to begin with, in fact, let's go with the premise of the book is to educate someone who doesn't know, who doesn't have the finer points of the economy. So, if you could take the trajectory to first the pre-independence stage, where we were a very rich country, as you said, during the Mughal era, and then how we, the biggest challenge before Nehru was, to bring back the economy, to set I think, the institutions first before he moved on to do anything else.
Well, let me say a couple of things about the book and then address the point that you raise. First and foremost, this is part of a series. This is a 75-year series that Rupa Publications are doing, where there's Monu Nalapat, who's a common friend of yours and mine, who's written on foreign policy, and there's another book on sport. There's something more coming out on culture, etc. So these are brief, and the brief from my publisher was that it should not exceed 40,000 words. So, in the sense, this is the smallest book I have written. The publisher is very clear that we don't want more than 40,000 words. So, it's a slim volume. And when they gave me this word limit, I said to myself, I cannot really write a serious kind of academic book about 75 years of the Indian economy in 40,000 words. But what I can certainly do is to actually introduce all that serious scholarship that we already have, and this enormous serious scholarship in this country. A young person who doesn't know anything about the economy, particularly, as I said it, the post-millennials. That is, this book is really written for someone born in 2000 and is now 21, 22, 23 years of age. Young people who are in college or coming out of college. Because there's so much being written about, India, where is India going, etc., etc. I think it's extremely important to understand, where we are coming from. And the story of where we are coming from is an interesting story. I've actually said, written this book in some ways like a story, because one, India, like China, was a dominant economy of the world till the 1700s. For almost 1,000 years. And there's a lot of talk in India about, the destruction caused by the invaders, the Mughal rulers, and, the various other people who ruled this country before the British came. But the reality is that before the British came, India was one of the most vibrant economies in the world. And we had maritime trade with large parts of the Indian Ocean region. We had land trade with Central Asia, with Southeast Asia. So actually, the pre-British economy was a vibrant economy. So whatever we may think about, people invading India over centuries, they didn't destroy the economy. That is very important to understand. Which is why in 1700, China and India were the world's largest economies. Then what happened? Then the Europeans arrived. So the story of India's backwardness is about European colonialism, not just British, but French and Dutch and others, Portuguese. European colonialism destroyed the economy of this country, and that has been well recorded. In fact, Dadabhai Nauroji one of the inspirational figures of the national movement, wrote a book called Poverty and the Un-British Rule in India. And then more recently, my two former teachers, Utsa Patnaik and Prabhat Patnaik at the Nehru University, have actually estimated the drain of wealth coming out of India. It runs into trillions of dollars in today's estimates. So the destruction of the Indian economy happened during British rule. So I begin my book with that story. Then the second story I tell is how actually even before independence, from around 19, beginnings of the 1900s till 1947, we actually had a vibrant debate in this country on policy options. And the two
On
countries,
policy, sorry, I missed the last word.
policy options. I mean, you look at the literature, and I've referred to that. There's an excellent book by an economist from the Delhi University called J. Krishnamurthy, who incidentally happens to be the maternal uncle of S. Jaishankar, our foreign minister. He was a professor of economics, and he's written an excellent analysis of the writings of Indian economists during the interwar period, before the independence. And I've quoted quite a bit of that and show how the vibrant debate in India, what we should do. And that debate got classified into three schools of thought, which I again introduced people to. There was the Bombay Plan and the views of the Indian business. There was the National Planning Committee, which was actually headed by none less than Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru. Both Bose and Nehru gave leadership to the National Planning Committee of the Indian National Congress. Then there was what was called the Gandhian Plan, written by a devotee of Gandhiji called Kappa. Then there was a People's Plan written by M.N. Roy and V.M. Tarkunde, who incidentally happens to be the father-in-law of another friend of ours, Ryan Karandiwala. These are all interesting characters. And they've all written on what should be the policy options for India. And I've tried to summarize those. Then, of course, I come to the post-independence period and take the reader through that chapter after chapter.
That's a good summing up of the book. But let's take it section by section, which is, if you say broadly, there was the Nehru era with the socialist economy, how we then moved on towards the 91 liberalization, where you actually, I think at that time you were probably editing the Financial Express. You had a ringside view of that, and then you also during Manmohan era, you were an advisor in the PMO, a media advisor. So just take us through the. Let's start with Nehru, the challenges before Nehru, and whether he was right in looking towards Japan and Russia as the inspiration, as you write, or in retrospect, could he have done things differently? Since Nehru is so much under the scanner today, also.
Exactly. Well, first of all, is I think for young people today should remember that in the 1940s, the countries that inspired the national movement, the countries that inspired the leadership of the national movement, were actually Japan and Soviet Union. Because they're the two countries which, like China today, industrialized rapidly. Japan industrialized in the 19th century. So when Swami Vivekananda went to Japan in 1896, followed by a visit of Rabindranath Tagore, followed by a visit of Vishweshwaraya, and all of that happens between 1896 and 1906 in that 10-year period. All three of them came back to India completely impressed by Japan. They said, here's an Asian country, very traditional like ours, Buddhist largely, people are very traditional in their living style, etc., not at all European, very Asian, and yet such a modern industrial economy. And you can see how much they were influenced by the Japanese experience. The second country, of course, was the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union impressed the leadership of the national movement like Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, a large number of left of center leaders in the Congress party. So these are the two examples. So it's not that there was any other example available, because the West was all full of colonial empires. They were colonizers. And the United States was not such a great economy at the beginning of this last century. It was dependent essentially on investment by Europeans. Most of the investment going into the US till the Second World War was essentially European investment. going in the US. So therefore, the countries that inspired Indians at the time of the freedom struggle were Japan and Soviet Union. And after, and you know what is very interesting, you know, you said Jawaharlal Nehru was a socialist. Yes, but even the Bombay Plan, written by J.R.D. Tata, G.D. Birla, Lala Sriram, Purushottam Das Thakur Das, you know, the leadership of Indian industry uh, in the 1940s. Even the Bombay Plan, and you know, I have, I think, a copy of my book here somewhere. This is the book you're referring to, the Bombay Plan, in which I reproduced the original document. I managed to get hold of the original document. The economy they refer to, the two economies that even these industrialists refer to as examples for India are Japan and Soviet Union. You know, that's the example they give. So even those who are not socialists, you know, those who wanted to see India industrialize rapidly and rise up very quickly, looked at the Soviet experience, the Japanese experience, and said, "This is what we must do."
So that was the need of the hour, was I think also the intervention of the state into it. So then we move on to the Indira years. If you could take us, even you say before her 60s were really the crisis, the stagnant years of the Indian economy also. So take us to the
That's
60s
right.
to the Indira years.
So, you know, let me mention four numbers which are there in my book and which I always keep asking people to remember. We should never forget these four numbers. Number one, from the year 1990 to 1940, for 50 years, the rate of growth of production in India was almost 0%. So it was a stagnant economy. For 50 years before independence, this was a stagnant economy. Of course, there are parts of India that were doing well, like Punjab, like Tamil Nadu, what is now Madras Presidency, Bombay Presidency, which is Maharashtra, Gujarat. And there are parts of India not doing well at all, like the Bengal Presidency, Bihar, United Provinces. But overall, India grew at 0%. That's the first number from 1890 to 1940. From 1950 to 1980, those 30 years, we grew at 3.5%. From 1980 to 2000, we grew at 5.5%. And from 2000 to 2015, we grew at 7.5%. So this shows a trajectory of growth. Now, the period 1950 to 80 is divided into two sub-periods. The 50s themselves, when Nehru was prime minister, India did reasonably well. You know, we compare India to other industrializing countries. It is not as if the Nehruvian decade for the economy was a disaster. No, contrary to a lot of people's wrong perception. We did reasonably well compared to China, compared to East Asian economies. In fact, South Korean economists used to come for training in Delhi School of Economics. People used to come to India, Egyptians, Indonesians, South Koreans. Delhi became a kind of education hub for economic policy. And the Planning Commission had a lot of foreigners coming to study India because 50s, India did reasonably well. The turning point begins really with the war with China in 62, the two drought years of 65, 66, 66, 67, the war with Pakistan 65, the war with Pakistan again in 71. The whole decade, the 60s was a washout. And the economy really stagnated. And that was also, as a political journalist, you know very well, the 60s was a decade of political crisis. The Nehruvian period ended. There were suddenly a new growth of regional political parties, Charan Singh in Uttar Pradesh, EMS in Kerala, and different parts, Annadurai in Tamil Nadu. So the Congress kind of began to vacate space, and others moved in. So the 60s was a bad decade, and Indira Gandhi's response to that was to turn left. She took the support of the CPI, nationalized banks, abolished privy purses. Not just banks, she nationalized mining, she nationalized coal, she nationalized wheat trade. Whole range of economic activity was nationalized. The license permit Raj was straightened. Nobody could set up anything without coming to Delhi and standing in a queue in Udyog Bhavan and getting some joint secretary to give you permission. So it was a disastrous period. And quite understandably, India fell behind. particularly with respect to our East Asian neighbors. I mean, that was the decade in which Korea was taking off, Taiwan was taking off, Malaysia was taking off, Indonesia was taking off, and we were not. And then, as you said correctly, 91 was a turning point. Some change began in the 80s, even with Indira Gandhi, when she came back to power.
I'm going
She
to
began.
hold you to that and take a quick break and come back as we take our viewers to the 90s and the journey as in India really as the turning point really and also the now because Dr. Baru very cleverly said the 21st century into two halves. One is till 2014 and one is I guess the Modi era. So we're going to talk to him about that distinction also, but after a break. Hello and welcome back to Cover Story. We're in conversation with Dr. Sanjay Baru, who's just out with his latest book, which is on 75 years on the Indian economy. We've been through the first half of but now the 80s leading to the 90s is really where I want you to take us as to what brought about the 91 move.
Well, on what brought about the 91 reforms, there are two opinions, by and large, among professional economists. The dominant opinion, of course, is that we had a crisis in 91, and because of the crisis, the government had to go to the IMF for a loan, and the IMF said, you have to do A, B, C, D. If you don't do this, we will not give you money. So, in a sense, we were forced to do it. And it was a difficult period geopolitically. The Soviet Union, which was an important ally for India, had collapsed, disappeared, and the Americans were tightening their screw on us. So, therefore, we were forced into opening up trade liberalization, industrial policy. That's one way of looking at what happened in 91. But I take a slightly different view in whatever I've written over the last 30 years, which is that while the external crisis was a trigger, the real reason for the change was the fact that India was changing. And the most important change that happened in India, one was the Green Revolution that created a new class of farmers. Agricultural productivity was going up. Demand for manufactured goods in rural areas was going up. People were buying cycles, motorcycles, air conditioners, etc., etc. And therefore, demand for industry was going up. But entrepreneurship was going up. I mean, in states, particularly Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, the undivided Andhra, a new class of entrepreneurs came up. They started investing in a range of industries. So there was a transformation of Indian capitalism. So it's not just that there was a crisis from which forced government to change, but there was also change from below happening. The Green Revolution certainly was a very important phenomenon that created need for change. And the second thing that was happening, one partly because of the Green Revolution, but also because of the emergence of an urban middle class, was that people from outside Delhi, particularly southern India and western India, were saying, why should we go to Delhi for everything? I mean, I got a piece of land in Hyderabad. I got money I can borrow from a bank, set up an industry. Why the hell should I go and stand in the queue in Delhi and compete with the builder? And in some of the earlier articles I've written, I gave the example of Nagarjuna Fertilizers, which came up in Kakinada, set up by KVK Raju, who was competing with KK Birla for that license. So you had on the one hand the Birla friends in Delhi, and Mr. Raju, who was an engineer, who had actually worked for Union Carbide. So what did Mr. Raju do? He went and tied up with Snam Progetti and Otavia Katroki and got the fertilizer license and set up a mill. Now there are lots of such examples. In 90s also, the IT revolution, the Infosys, So it was a period of entrepreneurship, middle class entrepreneurship, if you like. And I think therefore the economy moved up, rate of growth moved up, share of trade in national income improved. So in my judgment, the 90s up to 2000, I would say 10, certainly, when the transatlantic financial crisis happened. It was a golden era. Things started to become a bit difficult. The transatlantic financial crisis created certain financial pressures. Then we had problems, political problems, what was called policy paralysis in UPA 2. And slowly the economy began to falter. And we thought with the arrival of a new regime, things will change. But they have changed a bit, but not adequately. So we are still not returned to that 7.5, the 7.5% average growth of what I call the Narasimha Rao Vajpayee Manmohan Singh era. the three coalition prime ministers delivered the highest rates of growth for India. Now we are waiting to see whether the government can match that record.
Which is the main thing, Also, the question is of personalities. The golden era was, I think, during a lot of it during when Manmohan Singh was steering the ship, either as finance minister or prime minister. So, how much of a role are personalities also playing? We thought Modi would take the risk and be the CM of Gujarat kind of a model, but he somehow he's done a U-turn and he's become more Indira Gandhi in his whole economic policies also.
I think so. I mean, I think the thing is not just Dr. Manmohan Singh, but I think I would give credit to all three of them, which is Rao, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and Manmohan Singh. All three of them, in my judgment, understood the what had to be done politically for the that link. Economists think economic growth is all about this policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, trade policy. Economists only. The politician has to understand what is the right politics. What politics do I pursue in order to be able to promote economic growth? And I think all three of them understood that link between politics and policy. The problem with this current with Prime Minister Modi is that you take each of the three or four major initiatives: demonetization, land bill, farmers bill, recently the telecom policy, um, whatever it's called. And each of these policies, you take two steps forward, step backward, or one step forward, two steps backward, and that shows a inability to understand the politics of managing policy. Why do you? Why did the farm law whole issue go out of hand? There's nothing wrong with the policy itself, but it's the management of the policy. Land policy. Why did they have to shelve it? Again, same thing. So I think it's political failure on the part of Prime Minister Modi and his team. That is really at the root of the fact that this government has not been able to make any major changes impacting the economy. I mean, there have been some changes, they've improved the fiscal situation a bit, they've improved financial health of the public sector, of banks a bit, and hopefully all of this will help revive growth to some extent. But I think overall impact so far, we are waiting, watching. Most forecasts say that in this period we are in right now in, the growth rate is unlikely to be, an average growth rate is unlikely to be more than 5 to 6%. And we are certainly below 7.5. I mean, that we have, and people are now even justifying. I mean, Ruchi wrote a column the other day saying, "Oh, what is wrong with 5%?" It's like saying, "What is wrong with getting second class? I passed now." Okay, passed. तो क्या फर्क पड़ेगा?
So to take up from one of your earlier comments, are coalition governments better for the economy? At least in India's case, that seems to be the case. That other than one single party rule.
Yes, for a very simple reason. Because coalition political management is extremely difficult task, and that forces the leadership to bargain, to adjust, to give and take. We are a country with a very complex society, India. And you can't simply sit in Delhi and tell the whole country do this and everybody will do it. Aisa hota nahi, right? So that is why emergency failed. I mean, Indira Gandhi had to withdraw and declare elections. You cannot dictate to people. So to take everybody along with whatever change, you need a consensual style. And actually, Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014 talking about cooperative federalism. That was his term. And yet today, when the states are all crying, saying, "Where is the cooperative federalism?"
What has given rise to is a lot of strong finance ministers at the state level. I was just hearing the Tamil Nadu finance minister. We had West Bengal also had a good finance. So clearly, that's what's coming up. If not the center, at least the states is showing great promise in that sense. But
Yeah, and states have to play a big role, much bigger role going forward.
we hope it's a role that everybody will go together. But thank you so much for this conversation. We're out of time, and congratulations on a very good book. And hope to have more conversations with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priya.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.